Over the past 30 years, the number of people in American prisons quadrupled. Today on MHReports, we talk about the American criminal justice system, the flaws, and how it can be improved. I talked to Fernando Bermudez. He was thrown into jail for murder. 18 years later, a judge found him innocent of the crime and released him. But Bermudez lost nearly 2 decades of his life for a crime he never committed.
Wow, I've never killed nobody in my life. Why am I being charged with murder? Why do I have a life sentence?
Then, is our justice system flawed? Our panel weighs in on corruption, drug laws, and what some say is the next civil rights movement in America. MHReports starts now. Hey there everyone, I'm Marcus Harun. A study by the Criminal Justice Research Center at Ohio State University found that about 10,000 people in the United States may be wrongfully convicted of serious crimes each year. These people sit in their small, dark jail cells wondering why they're in prison for a crime they never committed. That's the case for Fernando Bermudez. After a boy was killed in a fight at a New York club, 5 young witnesses identified Bermudez in court as a murderer, and he was convicted in 1992. No gun, fingerprint, or other evidence tied him to the crime. Then, a year after the conviction, the witnesses all admitted their testimony was false. But it didn't clear him. He spent 18 years of his life in jail, and he said it changed him.
Am I going to die in prison? That's what I thought, because there was so much violence around me that I thought that, well, someone could be just as delusional as the next person I've encountered and moved away from, that I can die in this place. Tomorrow is not promised.
Now, those years that you spent there in prison, could you tell us what it was like? What kind of things did you have to endure while you were there?
Well, I had to endure the humiliation and indignity of strip searches, of being physically assaulted while I'm there by both inmates and correctional guards. It was a very difficult circumstance that tested the very essence of my humanity. I grew very sad and very depressed.
Bermudez was arrested and put in a New York prison as a 22-year-old. Since day one, he maintained he was innocent. He said he was nowhere near the scene of the murder.
I was shocked because I didn't know why I was being arrested. I honestly did not know. And I just heard my mother screaming from our second floor window. And I was just like, wow, okay, there's a misunderstanding. The situation's going to get resolved. I'll be home by that night.
But Bermudez was wrong. For almost 2 decades, he sat in jail, and he was left with a lot of questions.
Wow, I've never killed nobody in my life. Why am I being charged with murder? Why do I have a life sentence? I would ask that, but I had no answer.
In prison, as he searched for answers, he did find one good thing. He met his future wife, Crystal.
My idea was to go in to give Fernando hope and to not give up.
Crystal's father had a prison ministry, and she came to give Bermudez encouragement in his fight for justice.
I just came in to help, support him, and we just kind of like hit it off. He's very smart and educated. He was into bodybuilding at that time, and we just kind of hit it off. We were able to support each other, because I was going through a few things myself.
He and Crystal decided to get married and have 3 children while he was incarcerated.
I tried to maintain my faith. I prayed. I battled thoughts of suicide, and I overcame that. And one of the sources was the love of my wife, who stood by me throughout my years, who gave me beautiful children, and together we fought the good fight to try to make the truth prevail as soon as possible.
But the couple said they had many ups and downs after Crystal relocated to New York.
Where at that point I lost all my means of support. I had an accident happen to my hand and had 3 surgeries. And so during that time I was unemployed.
It seemed, though, the family had more downs than ups.
I just kind of like hit rock bottom, and I ended up having to relocate to Connecticut, and where I knew no one. At one point I was able to get off my feet, and then our oldest daughter got hit by a car. That pulled me out of work. And then at another point, I got laid off from work because I was pregnant with our 3rd child.
She had to deal with all these problems on her own while her husband was locked up. She believed he was innocent, but it wasn't easy to answer people when they asked, "Where is your husband?"
People would talk about their husband or their father, and we couldn't help but to mention the person we were in love with. And then we had to kind of live behind a lie. make up a story, because whenever we let people in too much, then they become judgmental.
I would look at those cold steel bars in front of my cell, and they would just be there every morning when I went to sleep and I woke up, and I would see them right there, impenetrable as they were. And I would say, well, when is this door going to open up and I'm going to be a free man?
That day came in 2009 after 11 appeals. He was freed. A judge found Bermudez innocent and released him at age 40.
He's found his truth, his voice. After 18 years of no one believing you, not having a voice, he's able to have a voice, and he knows how to use it. And even though they tried to put him down and give him the scarlet letter, he's rose above that.
After nearly 2 decades in jail, he was able to finally spend time with the ones he loved.
Being a family man is very important. Today, I am the school chaperone at my children's school, taking them to the Hartford Science Center. And I just am involved in their life and the martial arts and so much else to promote their well-being and character development.
After years of waiting, he now enjoys family activities like swimming and pumpkin picking with his children, Kayla, Carissa, and Fernando III. But some family struggles continue.
And our son, Fernando III, he struggles. This morning he woke up and he didn't see his dad. I guess Fernando was in the shower, and he was like, I just want to go see him. Where is he? Where is he? I'm like, okay, we have to go to school. We have to, well, where is he? Where is he? He just becomes a nervous wreck because he really thinks that someone's going to come and take his dad away.
Now, at 44, Bermudez lectures around the world, hoping to save others from the years of suffering he endured. Police departments and universities have invited him to speak in places as far as Germany and Japan.
What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone else. It shouldn't happen to your loved one. It shouldn't happen to any person out in the world, particularly if you didn't commit a crime. It's just a horrible experience. And so I want to help reform the system. I want to educate people about factors that lead to the innocent being incarcerated. I want to inspire people to realize that with every adversity that they face, that they can overcome adversity, because I overcame a great level of adversity. My story has had a global impact, in fact, ranging from, in America, I've had prosecutors tell me that from that point on, they're going to be more careful. I've had law students who are going to become prosecutors tell me the same. I've had students change their majors into criminal justice to make a difference.
Have you reached anyone who's saying that they don't trust you because of what happened before, even though the legal system cleared you?
Yes.
Do people trust you?
Yes, yes. I haven't had an issue. I mean, let's talk about trust. I was once in a courtroom as a criminal defendant. Now I'm actually lecturing in Hartford and New Haven federal district courts before federal judges who invite me in their courtroom to speak to people who have been incarcerated and are on federal probation in order to help them make good decisions.
And now Fernando is traveling around the country and around the world, spreading his message of what can be improved about different criminal justice systems. And the criminal justice system in America and the improvements is a discussion that we're about to have with these 3 panelists that I'm going to introduce you to. First off, we have Gabe Grand, Politics Fellow at Policy Mike in New York. Yi Wu, who's a contributor at Policy Mike in Providence, Rhode Island. Matt Pilisher is the producer of a documentary called Broken on All Sides. He's in Pennington, New Jersey. So to start out with you, Matt, what do you think is the main thing that's wrong with the criminal justice system?
Well, it's a hard question to pinpoint, but I think one of the main things is that we have the highest incarceration rates in the history of the world. We have the most people locked up. We have 25% of the world's prisoners, but we only have 5% of the world's population. We also have more of our racial minorities locked up than any other country in the world. So I think that's a good starting point for the problems.
And what's your opinion, Yi?
Well, I think the problem can be summarized by 2 excess and 1 inadequacy. 2 excess being there are too many people in prison for the wrong reasons, and those who are in prison are in there for too long. And the inadequacy is that when the inmates get out of prison, former inmates, they do not get sufficient support to become productive citizens again.
And Gabe, what do you think is the main problem with our system?
Well, Marcus, I think that a lot of the problems that we're seeing with our criminal justice system actually can be traced back to problematic government policies that originated in the 1970s and 1980s when both federal and state governments decided to adopt tough on drugs, tough on crime policies that have caused our prison population to skyrocket by over 500% in the last 30 years.
And now we're going to get into each of those issues and each of your opinions. But also, first I'd like you to respond to one quote of what Fernando Bermudez said during my interview. Take a look.
Well, I think that we need to hold corrupt prosecutors like James G. Rodriguez, the prosecutor responsible in my case, accountable. He knew the evidence from the beginning, and he sought not to investigate, as well as, according to all the witnesses and documented evidence we have, he coerced and threatened the witnesses into falsely testifying against me. We also need a level of accountability for police departments who don't enact proper protocol with mistaken eyewitness identification reforms, which are the leading cause of why people land in prison.
Okay, now Matt, you heard Fernando there. He said that corrupt prosecutors is one of the main issues why people are landing in prisons. You've done a lot of research. Is that one of the issues that you found?
I haven't specifically looked into cases of prosecutorial misconduct, but I think the prosecutor's role and their discretion about whether and how to charge someone and what kind of deals they want to offer people is a huge problem in the justice system, and it is nearly impossible to hold prosecutors accountable.
Yi, how much do you think that prosecutors and their biases has to do with having people land in jail for the wrong reasons? What do you think?
I'm not sure if I would exactly use the word corrupt prosecutors, because that involves some kind of a personal financial gain. But I think there is a problem of overzealous prosecutors, that they will always press for the maximum sentence and the worst charge possible, for sometimes very disproportionately. I don't think it's the problem of bad people. Rather, it's a problem of bad laws. If we get rid of the laws against those non-violent drug possession, then the prosecutors wouldn't have those tools.
Absolutely. I think that we do have a problem with overzealous prosecution. But I have to say that the main issue, and the thing that enables prosecutors to do so, is actually our mandatory minimum sentencing laws, which offer incredibly strict penalties for sometimes minor, second or third offenses, especially relating to drugs. So I think that if we encouraged mandatory minimum sentencing reform, and again, place control of sentencing back in the hands of the judges on a case-by-case basis, you would actually see decreased instances of prosecutors who are pushing very harsh jail sentences, sometimes upwards of 10 years, on the grounds that there's a mandatory minimum on the books that allows them to do so.
That's a really good point. I think the whole plea deal system is really important to understand, and if you think about the fact that, for example, felony convictions, something like 94% of felony convictions are obtained through plea deals, plea bargaining. So most people are not going to trial, they're not seeing a judge or a jury of their peers.
What do you think the main disadvantage is of someone who's accused of a crime not getting to see a judge?
Well, a lot of people are, let's say, in jail, waiting there, and a lot of times, so I knew a guy that was in this position, and he appears in my movie. He's sitting in jail, he couldn't pull together $1,000 to get out. His bail was too high, and he comes from a community where his friends and family couldn't put together that kind of money, so he was rotting in jail waiting for trial. Well, a prosecutor comes to him and says, hey, if you take this deal, I'll just give you instant probation so you can get out, you can go home, you can see your friends and family, but you'll have a conviction. Well, you don't understand that maybe when you have that conviction, it's hard to get a job, you can't get public housing in some cases, you can't get a license to be a barber, you can't get financial aid to go to school. So a lot of people you don't explain to them the collateral consequences of a criminal record.
Race was brought up briefly, and I saw in your piece on policy, Mike, you mentioned how the disparities between African Americans and whites who are in jail. You said that 1 out of every 12 working age black men are imprisoned versus whites, which is 1 out of 87. So that's a huge difference. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Drug use is pretty even among different races. However, there's much more blacks and Hispanics being imprisoned for the same thing than for the white population. So I think this disparity definitely exists from the beginning when police arrest someone to the end when someone is sentenced.
I did a piece recently where I was reporting in the South Bronx, and I spent a lot of time just walking around and talking to people. And I have to say that almost every single person that I talked to had recounted some experience of either personally being stopped and frisked by the New York City police, or watching a friend or a group of friends stopped and frisked. And I think that when you're looking at why is there such a great racial disparity in our criminal justice system, in the sense that more Hispanics and more blacks are being locked up, that's your answer right there. You know, if we had police walking around, for example, the Upper West Side, just stopping and frisking people on their way home from work in suits, people would be up in arms.
The other thing is, not only would those communities be up in arms on the Upper West Side, but they would actually find a lot of drugs, because we know that across populations, across races, people use drugs and sell drugs at roughly the same rates.
Now, staying on the topic of drugs, getting back to Gabe for a moment, you, in one of your articles, mentioned that drug rehabilitation and education as two of the better solutions as opposed to imprisonment. Can you expand on that?
It's called the Department of Corrections for a reason. Yet what we are doing right now is we are taking people, sometimes from a very young age, and putting them in a context where they are essentially spending all of their time when they're in prison hanging out with other people who have been convicted. And they're hanging out with other criminals. And they're inside an environment where crime is actually promoted.
Okay, Gabe, it seems like one thing that we're continually coming back to, at least within this panel, is drugs. Do you think that that is one issue that it seems like there's an overwhelming amount of support that this needs to be changed?
I think you are seeing an overwhelming amount of support, but it's being, in some cases, defeated by very powerful lobbying organizations and lobby groups. And those groups are really just arms of a few specific industries that would not like to see change in this area. And I can tell you exactly what that is. It's the privatization of prisons. More and more we're seeing states and the federal government rely on private companies to send off their prisoners to private correctional institutions. And the problem with that is that there's a conflict of interest inherent in doing business by locking people up.
I think it's true. I think sometimes the privatization can be overemphasized in prison reform circles. I think it's a particularly insidious problem. People should not be, directly profiting and like stocks and bonds sold on the stock exchange as these companies are over people being locked in cages. But it's only about, I think, 6 or 7% of prisoners in the U.S. that are in private prisons.
Talking a little bit about what the solutions are to the problem. Matt, you looked and found tons of problems with your documentary, Broken on All Sides, but through your research, and can you bring up some of the information that you had through your documentary and steps that can be taken, at least initial steps that can be taken that can solve some of the issues that you have with the system?
I think in order to get these kinds of changes, we need to really organize a movement to put pressure on the powers that be, on those corporations that benefit from the current, system, and also on politicians who don't want to be the next one to let out on parole the random guy that then goes and commits a murder. We need to push them to be smart on crime. We need to organize a new civil rights movement to really put pressure and make these changes.
Yi, do you think that a civil rights movement, something that big, is really what's necessary?
Well, I see that there is already a movement that is uh, that is beginning, and that movement is even bipartisan.
Do you feel that the current system as it is, do you think that it's filling the purpose? Do you think it's keeping us safe? Because that is at the base of what the criminal justice system is for. Do you feel like it's accomplishing that?
Well, I think that a lot of Americans have a misconception that the more that you lock up, quote, the bad guys, the more public safety you're going to have, which is really just not true, because many Americans have a black and white view of crime. In other words, you're a criminal or you're not a criminal. And I think that needs to be changed, and I think people need to be open to a more nuanced understanding.
So much great information, but we're going to have to end our conversation there for today, guys. Thanks very much to our panelists for joining us. Gabe Grand from Policy Mike, Yi Wu from Policy Mike, and Matthew Pilisher, creator of Broken on All Sides. Thanks very much for joining us today, and you can see the full discussion at harun.me. Join us next month as we investigate what the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention call the nightmare bacteria. They warn it will cause catastrophic consequences. We talk to doctors, experts, and patients about drug-resistant bacteria. Plus, the connection between the nightmare bacteria and the food you may be eating.
It's a big problem in athletes, in the pro teams, in the locker rooms. But there's so many antibiotic resistances that are developing, and it could only get worse.
Comment below or follow me on Facebook or Twitter if you have any topics to include on our next roundtable discussion. I'm Marcus Harun, and have a great day, everyone.